I remember the first night Lucas and I made love. It was as though the tension that had been shimmering between us for weeks finally boiled over. We were in his dimly lit apartment. The soft hum of the city outside, a distant backdrop to the intimacy building between us. He looked at me with a quiet intensity, his hand brushing my cheek before pulling me closer. The moment his lips met mine, everything else faded away. My doubts, my fears, and the knowledge of how wrong this was. All that mattered was the warmth of his touch and the way my body seemed to respond instinctively to his. His movements were slow at first, hesitant even, as though he was afraid that once we crossed this line, there would be no going back. But as our hands began to explore the contours of each other, the uncertainty melted away. Lucas was gentle, and in those moments I felt cherished, as though I was the only person in the world who mattered to him. It was a connection I hadn't felt in so long, a raw, unfiltered connection that left me breathless. As our bodies intertwined, it wasn't just lust driving us. It was something deeper, something I hadn't been able to put into words until now. Afterward, we lay in silence, his arms wrapped around me as I rested my head on his chest. I felt a wave of emotions, guilt, relief, and a strange sense of peace. I knew this moment would change everything, and yet, as I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of his heartbeat, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake. Maybe this was what I had been searching for all along. It all began when I, Sonya, started tutoring Lucas, a young man preparing for his entrance exams. At first, it was a simple arrangement. He needed help with foreign literature, and I was more than qualified to guide him. But from the very first lesson, I sensed something different about him. He was smart, driven, and incredibly observant. The way he watched me, studied me even, left me feeling exposed in a way I hadn't felt in years. Yet, I pushed those feelings aside, convincing myself it was just admiration for a teacher. Lucas's parents were away in Venice, leaving him alone to focus on his studies. It wasn't long before our lessons became less about books and more about the unspoken tension between us. I tried to maintain a professional distance, but with every session, I found myself drawn to him in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't just his intellect or his youth. It was the way he made me feel seen, understood. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that kind of attention until it was staring me in the face. The turning point came when Lucas brought me flowers. Lilies, the same scent that filled my apartment. He claimed they were for himself, that he liked the way they smelled, but we both knew better. When he asked me to call him by his name, something shifted between us. We shared a kiss, one that should have ended there, but it didn't. I should have stopped it, but I couldn't. The pull was too strong, the desire too overwhelming, and in that moment, I gave in. Our relationship grew complicated quickly. I knew it was inappropriate, knew the age gap and the power dynamics between us made it impossible, but when we were together, none of that seemed to matter. We spent more and more time together, sharing meals, exploring literature, and basking in the stolen moments of intimacy. It felt reckless and dangerous, but also exhilarating, as though we were defying the rules of the world just by being together. But as much as I wanted to believe we could make it work, reality began to creep in. One evening, Lucas missed the lesson after spending the night with a girl named Emily. He confessed it to me, expecting anger, but I surprised us both with my calm reaction. I don't know why I wasn't more upset. Maybe because deep down, I knew this relationship was doomed from the start. Or maybe I had already resigned myself to the idea that we were living on borrowed time. Things became even more strained when my new neighbor, Dimitri, showed interest in me. He was kind, attentive, and so different from Lucas. Part of me wondered if Dimitri was the safer choice, the one who could offer me stability and the future. But I didn't want safety, not after tasting the excitement that came with being with Lucas. Still, seeing the way Lucas reacted to Dimitri's presence stirred something in me. Jealousy, insecurity, and the realization that I didn't want to let Lucas go. One night, after another argument sparked by jealousy, I found myself in bed with Dimitri. That night, everything was a blur. I knocked on Dimitri's door, the alcohol in my system giving me a false sense of courage. When he opened the door, there was a pause, a moment when neither of us spoke, but the tension was thick enough to drown in. His eyes searched mine, and without a word, he pulled me inside. It wasn't romantic or gentle, it was desperate, as if we both knew this wasn't about love. It was about filling the void, drowning out the loneliness that had been gnawing at me for weeks. The second his lips touched mine, I let go of everything, my doubts, my regret, and let myself get lost in the sensation of his warmth. His hands were rough, urgent, as they moved over my skin, and I welcomed it. There was no tenderness here, no slow build-up of passion. It was raw, an unspoken understanding that this wasn't meant to heal, only to mask the hurt we were both feeling. We moved together in the dim light of his apartment, my back pressed against the cold wall, our breaths mingling in the quiet night. His touch was demanding, and I gave into it completely, letting the need for escape overwhelm me. Every kiss, every movement felt like a rebellion against the pain I was trying to forget. Afterward, the silence was almost suffocating. We lay there, bodies tangled together, but I felt farther away from him than I had before. The room was filled with the scent of sweat and regret, and as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if this had been a mistake. Dimitri's arm draped over me, but it didn't bring the comfort I had hoped for. Instead, it only reminded me of what I was missing, what I had lost. I knew I was pushing Lucas away, knew I was sabotaging whatever fragile connection we had left, but I couldn't stop myself. It was as though I was testing him, seeing how far I could push before he'd finally leave. And when he did, it broke me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Lucas left, and I was alone again, staring at the shadows on the walls of my apartment, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. I had lost him, and with him, the possibility of something more than just a fleeting affair. I tried to move on, to focus on my life and my work, but the emptiness lingered. Weeks later, as I walked down the street, I felt someone call my name. I turned, and there he was, Lucas, standing in the distance, his face a mixture of surprise and hope. In that moment, I realized that maybe our story wasn't over. Maybe, despite everything, we were meant to find our way back to each other.